The time is 03:17 hours. This is the current situation. After having arrived at the confluence of Sultan's Dagger Ridge and the Wadi Akaret, the south prong of the split Iranian Armored Task Force joined up with the remnants of its advanced recon unit and dispersed into assault positions relative to Al-Bazir, the tiny commerce way station at the core of the debate over control of the 1080 corridor west to Kirkuk. Stemming from both a strict operational timetable and having all but isolated the small American blocking force holding the village, the brash Iranian command staff made the fateful decision to invest this obstruction to progress rather than wait for support from the oncoming eastern prong of the mechanized formation. Though touting considerably more firepower than the lightly equipped Marine scouts before them, the T-62 75 company of tanks has experienced the epiphany that is so often associated with combating U.S. armed forces by night. Comprised of 4 tanks, including the headquarters vehicle, the entire center pod of the armor assault is eliminated within a matter of moments by a single mobile anti-tank platform outfitted with high-tech nocturnal optics. Likewise, the attempt to use their tanks as a distraction in order to assail the village outskirts with light infantry is also repulsed. Consequently, the Iranians are left with but 2 tank platoons, devoid of the benefit of field command, to carry on the siege of Al-Bazir. As such, their resolve has turned from direct combat to the premeditated reduction of the village itself. For the Marines, this change of tactic might very well determine both their fate and that of their charge, that lonely gravel road leading to the Iraqi oil basin. Pursuing the barrage of Al-Bazir, the 3rd Tank Platoon on the open plain to the south continues to pummel the 2-story building that temporarily played host to the American news crew and their escorts. With the building on the verge of collapse, the tanks suddenly cease fire. A direct order from the Special Forces commander atop the Sultan's Dagger prompts them to venture forth from their advantageous defilade position in order to begin the methodical dismantling of the only visual and physical impediment hindering full-scale assault on the village interior. They are joined in this task by the number 1 tank of 1st Platoon. From its vantage point behind the newly immobilized BMP in the Wadi, it too can molest the stone barrier. Little by little, the south wall begins to crumble under the bombardment, leaving gaps in the perimeter that expose the settlement and the Marines inside to direct cannon fire. Recognizing that the tanks of 3rd Platoon are creeping forward, Captain Ricks orders Fox 2 to get into the game by establishing a hull-down position further forward the west wall in order to meet this new threat. Taking up position, the LAV reveals only its tow array to the enemy and immediately gains sight on the approaching T-62s. Identifying the middle vehicle as the most likely candidate to be the command tank, Fox 2 gains target acquisition and initiates its first launch of the entire battle. Maintaining lock all the way to the mark, the wire-guided missile penetrates the vehicle's frontal armor, promptly setting it ablaze. Alarmed by this event, the 2 subordinate tanks are momentarily shaken and thus freeze in place, providing Fox 2 the opportunity to instigate a subsequent attack. Unfortunately, the second missile loses track and impacts the desert floor well short of its designated target. Provided a reprieve, the T-62s counter-react while the LAV replenishes its array. Barely managing to identify the upper hull of Fox 2 with its outmoded targeting optics, the number 2 tank prepares to fire an AP round in its own defense using laser range finding. Luckily, the 115mm shell strikes the vehicle. Though not lethal, the resulting effect completes the failure of the LAV's already damaged drivetrain. The blast also incapacitates the exposed missile loader and wounds the 3 other crewmen. Not to be undone, the besieged Marines of Albeit are graced by the presence of another aerial benefactor. The wingman of Mozart 1 makes its first appearance over the battlefield, thus giving the Iranians yet another reason for consternation.
Mozart 2 could not join its element leader in the initial flyover due to mechanical concerns that delayed its activation. However, they'd finally arrived, but not a moment too soon. Likewise, armed with only their main gun, I informed the crew that their best bet of success would be the infantry that was attempting to outflank our position. They began their ingress by searching the sand dunes for warm bodies, using infrared sensors. Apparently, the intimidating presence of the Cobra was sufficient enough incentive to prompt multiple enemy vehicles inside the wadi into going mobile. Perhaps they simply didn't wish to become sitting ducks within the basin's limited confines. Not only did this force a T-62 into abandoning its angle of attack on the south wall, an insurgent light-duty truck was also detected exiting the dry wash to the far west. For whatever purpose, they appeared to be leaving the battlefield and heading north. However, the militants still didn't fully grasp the capabilities of our night vision technology, or the resolve and skill of the average Marine. Coyote 4 engaged the moving target from long range. It easily disposed of a fleeing vehicle and its crew.
Meanwhile, with law rockets now in their possession, half-depleted Delta Team uses a momentary respite from the insidious wall bombardment to exit the village compound via a convenient gap in the barrier. Here, they join a single member of Coyote 3 in the pitch trench. The only other surviving crewman of said LAV has already transitioned to the C2, serving as custodian over the insurgent agent. Having located a collection of isolated soldiers lying prone on the reverse slope of a sand dune, Mozart 2 moves into attack position and begins to pepper the exposed troops with its chin gun. In order not to become a target itself due to its stationary low hover, the Cobra promptly maneuvers away from the site, but not before erasing 4 Iranian sand scouts from participation in the ongoing struggle. Frustrated by their lack of progress and agitated by unaffordable losses in men and materiel, Iranian command decisions become even more disparate and supercilious.
في هذه المرحلة، وكان قائد مجهد جد مع الغضب، وذلك لأن مثل هذه القوة الصغيرة.
At this stage, the commandant was so overwrought with anger, because such a tiny blocking force was preventing him from seizing the vital crossroads and moving on towards Kirkuk, that he ordered a wholesale attack on the village with everything at our disposal, rather than await the arrival of the Eastern Formation. To me, this appeared to be an act of desperation that could easily end in disaster. Even our snipers were forced to reveal their firing positions in order to support this rash decision. Their only targets were semi-exposed vehicle crewmen, at ranges that tested the extreme limits of their night scope capabilities. Not only were the attacks on multiple targets ineffectual, my concern was that the muzzle flashes would threaten to attract the attention of the American sniper teams that were now known to be in the area. Despite our greater height advantage, such a well-trained, well-equipped adversary was far more likely to locate and dispatch us than vice versa.
Within the wadi, 1st Tank Platoon begins to inch their way to the north shelf of the depression adjacent the settlement, albeit reluctantly. In the process, however, the number 3 T-62 witnesses Charlie Team emerge from the pitch trench and withdraw back into the settlement, making the Marine Scouts prime targets for automatic weapons fire. To their good fortune, however, the team's naked jaunt is fleeting enough that the snap-fired machine guns fail to find a victim. On their way to retrieve their own allotment of short-range anti-tank munitions, Charlie Team once again demonstrates a bravado that coalesces with an atypical immunity to harm. Out on the open plain, the two remaining tanks of 3rd Platoon are hesitant to heed their new orders. Given the recent missile attack that devastated their command tank, they elect to hold station, aghast at what they see occurring astride them. Only seconds after the command crew pull themselves from their burning hulk, the tank's internal munitions cook off. The resulting series of explosions decimate the survivors before they can effect an escape. Not even the nearby plane scouts are able to facilitate rescue before being turned away by the inexorable fireworks. Skyward, the Cobra attack helicopter completes its return cycle and commences the second of its attack runs on the Iranian Sand Scouts. Captain Ricks recalls the event.
Although I was much more concerned with the tank's besieging objective Keystone than that of any enemy foot soldier, my attention was brought to bear on the night sky, and the thump of rotor blades overhead. Mozart 2 had returned for another pass on the soft targets concealed behind the dunes to the northeast. Since the chopper was not taking any ground fire of note, their attack was particularly stable and focused. I could only imagine the type of hell that those troops were enduring at the working end of that fearsome 3-barrel Gatling gun. As the Cobra began to move off once again, they spotted ground movement near reference point Enzuma. 2 armored cars were reversing away from the buildings. At first, I assumed the vehicles were trying to evade our airborne predator. In reality, they were simply maneuvering into position in order to make a run at the dunes. It became obvious that a rescue attempt was in the offing. Their desire to save their fellow scouts and recover the wounded was a noble gesture, albeit foolhardy. Coyote 2 was promptly notified of northbound targets traversing the fringes of the desert sands. Seconds later, both vehicles were savaged by 25mm cannon fire. To my surprise, the lead car nearly succeeded in disappearing behind the sand slope and potentially accomplishing its mission.
Not wasting any time, Mozart 2 sideslips its way back over the Sand Scouts for one more strafing run before expending the last of its ammunition. In its third and final flurry, the Cobra collects 2 more hapless victims for a grand total of 10 casualties. Declaring themselves Winchester, the crew departs the AO for good. As for the Sand Scouts, their attempt to skirt the village and reconnoiter the site has left them with not a single operational vehicle and a mere 6 active soldiers. In contrast, the Marines have sustained but 5 casualties, 5 wounded, 1 inoperable Coyote, and a damaged and immobile AT platform as a result of all of the preceding 30 minutes of action. The gauntlet has indeed been cast forth. From Captain Rick's perspective, the aerial assistance is comforting, but represents merely a sideshow to the main event. The under-equipped Cobras are of little value to what is now confronting the ground troops. Probing forward up the face of the wadi, 1st Tank Platoon begins to crest the shelf just outside the village. On the verge of bringing its own gun to bear at point-blank firing range to Al-Bazir, the No. 1 tank halts in defilade to scan the near terrain for possible threats. It is at this moment that 3 of the 5 tanks resume their barrage on the south wall. The primary assailants are the T-62s of 3rd Platoon, who are invigorated by their recent success.
على الرغم من خسارة ما يقرب من جميع سياراتنا استطلاع مدرعة وكذلك نصف دبابات.
Despite the loss of nearly all of our armored reconnaissance vehicles, as well as half the tanks of the T-62 75 Company, we still felt as though we had the upper hand in the battle. The south wall was being reduced to rubble, thereby revealing more of the village interior to our forces on the ground. The tanks of 1st Platoon were ready to roll into Al-Bazir from the wadi. Even the BMP scouts, out on the open plain, were preparing to accompany the armor of 3rd Platoon into the objective, should the need arise. With the apparent destruction of the anti-tank vehicle that was giving our tanks so much grief, all seemed to be in order. The small enemy contingent would soon be at our mercy. At least this was our assumption at the time. To our dismay, the Americans had other plans.
Realizing that the moment of truth is upon them, Captain Ricks directs the CP heavy machine gun to rake the exposed turret of the hull-down No. 1 tank with AP fire before it can clear crest with its main gun and attain bore sight on the village. Though a 50 caliber bullet is quite powerful at close range, it is incapable of penetrating tank armor. On the other hand, it can do considerable damage to the exterior control elements of a tank's operational systems. In initiating the attack from a second-story window, not only does the machine gun fire force the turned-out tank crew to seek refuge inside their turret, the offensive capability of the T-62 itself is in danger of being diminished as well. Maintaining an unrelenting rate of fire, the Browning succeeds in damaging both the weapon's targeting sensors and its optics. For the moment, this speculative tactic stems the tank advance, yet only serves to delay the inevitable. Beset by what appears to be an unending series of challenges, the men of 4th LAR have performed admirably, despite the limited resources and firepower typical of a reconnaissance unit. Half an hour into their mission at the road junction, the stalwart Marines' grip on Al-Bazir is firm and uncompromising. The all-important gravel-top thoroughfare remains barred to an invader that must access it if they hope to reach the Iraqi oil basin by daybreak with a heavy mechanized force. For now, time is on no one's side. The Iranians' strategic flanking opportunity is slipping away like sand through an hourglass. For the Americans, there is no rest for the weary. Another more ominous threat now looms, just over the horizon.
كنت أشاهد حكايات مكافحة الظاهرية على صاحب قصة قناة الإنترنت.